I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. Hopefully this will work. And then I can say a huge thank you for that film, which was a really wonderful review of my recent work, or some of it a little bit older. And I have to say, this is a huge act to follow, coming straight after Professor Bruckner. But I shall do my best, and I realise that you're probably all quite tired by this stage in proceedings. But I'm really grateful for having this opportunity to share my work. All of my career, in fact, has been involved with children's literature. My first foray, which eventually became my first book, was all about adaptation, the adaptation of a particular story form into children's literature, namely catabasis, or the descent into and back from the underworld. I've also become interested in the adaptation or take-up of children's books, which, as you've just heard so rightly, does involve that kind of engagement of children and different audiences. And as you've just heard, I've been involved in a number of collaborations with companies and organisations across the creative and cultural industries in the UK. These have led to a range of outputs, some of which you've just been looking at in those slides and videos, which have provided me with really precious insights into the creative industries and adaptation processes. They've also generated important new research avenues for me, and I've also extensively drawn upon these processes and insights in my own teaching. So today, I'm going to focus on the most recent of these collaborations. It really is kind of hot off the press. We launched the website, which I'm going to be talking about in particular, just this Wednesday. So it really is very new. And this last collaboration that I've been involved with is with composer Paul Rissman and the London Symphony Orchestra. And it is another example of my work based on Lewis Carroll's Alice books. So I realise, as I said, that by this stage in the proceedings, you might all be a little bit tired and not appreciate somebody talking yet more. So I'm going to give you a little brief moment of pause and to give you a flavour of one of the pieces of music which is at the heart of this collaboration. So I'm very much hoping that this works, and this should be Movement 2 of the Wonderland Suite. It's the White Rabbit, so see if you can hear a musical twitch and some thudding heartbeats to render the anxiety and stress of the White Rabbit. So that's a very good reminder for me. I just put my timer on actually to not be too late, and I'm going to try and keep to time today. What I'm going to cover in my lecture today is how this project came about and also what it led to. I'm going to spend about half of my time summarising the new research findings that it generated, and I'm also going to give you an outline of the creative works and educational resources that it's produced. So, as part of, I want to see it again, as part of my investigation of the 19th century visual identity of Lewis Carroll's Alice, which resulted in this book that you're looking at now, I looked at a huge number of versions of Alice in anything from biscuit tins and jewellery to ceramic tiles, amateur theatre programmes, photographs, and a lot more besides. One really important group of materials were the music sheets based on, inspired by, or at the very least linked to the Alice books, which were for private domestic use and which often had really lavish illustrations. They're important because they're some of the earliest coloured versions of Alice ever produced. The first, which you can see here, has her not in the blue that we tend to associate with Alice now, but in salmon pink. However, some like this one are essentially copied from the 10-year originals and then coloured. Others, like this one, are wholly new interpretations, and that was why I was really interested in them. And one of the sheets that I ordered to look through in the British Library, which you can just see at the bottom of this image, was Arthur Cleveland's 1874 Wonderland Quadrille on original subjects, suggested by Alice's Adventures Behind the Looking Glass for pianoforte. Now, initially, this was a massive disappointment, and not just because of the title mashup. There were no images of Alice at all, and after a cursory glance through, I just put this music sheet to one side. But I gradually realised that the way that this particular music was organised offered considerable opportunities. Rather than by scenes or based on the songs or poems within the books, which I'm going to be talking about in a moment, this particular piece had different sections for different characters. I was trying to understand what Alice looked like to the Victorians, but here in front of me, I realised, was the possibility of knowing what she might have sounded like to them. So I took this kind of revelation to composer Paul Risman and to the London Symphony Orchestra, and we developed a project that would deliver new concert suites based on the books for young audiences today, also drawing on these Victorian music sheets in an effort to blend in some of that Victorian contemporary flavour. So I'm just going to say a few words about how Paul and I, who professionally speaking speak very different languages, worked together. I wouldn't necessarily refer to myself as tone deaf, but I can't read music. So this is, these are two very different sets of expertise coming together. The places that we worked were essentially sort of two main locations, pretty different. The first was the British Library and the second was my kitchen. The first challenge that we had really was to figure out how and where we could look at these music sheets, which are usually languishing, unused and unseen in the British Library. We wanted to be able to look at them together and to make noise, highly un-library-like behaviour. But the British Library curators were really accommodating and on both occasions provided us with a meeting room where we could look and hum and crucially talk together. So we went to the library and Paul took a very dainty little keyboard, which you can also see here in this photograph. And we explored and photographed and scanned various bits and pieces of music. We also, as I said, spent quite a lot of time, this is another photograph in the British Library with all of these different manuscripts, music manuscripts that we were looking at. We also spent a lot of time, often in my kitchen, talking about the books, their characters and their structure. And it was at this point that Paul asked me a seemingly simple but actually incredibly important question, which generated an entire new research avenue for me, and which eventually led to this publication. The big question that he asked me was, what and where are the sounds of the Alice books. So that was all he asked me. He came along and he said, so where are the sounds, Kiera? And I was completely unable to answer that question. I was more than prepared to talk about what characters looked like and what they did, but anything about sound was completely new for me. So that question sent me back to the books to read and to more accurately, perhaps, to listen to them afresh. So I'm just going to spend the next part of my talk summarising for you the main findings of this article. So I guess you can have a look at Alice covering her ears as I do so. In general terms, sound is just really important in these books, but it's been neglected by scholars like me, seduced by the visual dimensions of them. In Wonderland, it turns out that the whole dream has been prompted by sounds. Also, some of the very earliest adaptations, as we've seen, were musical, and this process has continued up to this day. Music was also one of Lewis Carroll's lifelong interests, and he had very definite views about it. The oral origins of Alice's adventures in Wonderland are also really important in this context. Many of you will know that the tale was elaborated over the course of several river outings for the daughters of the Dean of the Oxford College, where Lewis Carroll lived and worked. These outings involved singing by adults and children, as well as storytelling and general conversation. So they were live performances, with the teller able to react to the responses and interjections and interactions of his young, familiar audience. And at Alice Liddell's behest, Carroll wrote the story down. So the originally sung and spoken words became the handwritten words of the manuscript, and then eventually, after circulating that manuscript, they became the typeset and published words of the books. And this wasn't a sort of linear process representing the obliteration of the spoken by the written word. Instead, it saw a regular to and fro between writing and performance. And the final works very much maintained the intimacy, direct address, the shared jokes and allusions of those live tellings. So given everything that I've already said then, it's fairly unsurprising in a way that music, song and voices of many descriptions find their way into the Alice books. Their music is often quite weird. These are dreams after all, unconventional and fantastical. Instruments often make horrible noises rather than being musical, while melodious sound and song issues forth from the natural world. The books also feature 4 songs which Carroll plotted into the second half of each of the books with really great care. These songs are intrinsically connected to and embedded within the narrative. They're not just ornamental flourishes that are kind of added in artificially. And it's true to say that other children's books of this period also have songs, but Carroll stands out very much in his indication of the nature of the music behind these songs. He had pre-existing tunes in mind for them. And although specific versions still need to be excavated for some of these, we can be fairly sure of their general nature, based on those we do know, things like Beautiful Star and Will You Walk Into My Parlour, and also bearing in mind Carroll's general taste in music. The music of these songs is catchy, simple and regular, what we maybe now call easy listening. Now, whether in song or in recitations or conversations or other speech acts, what really dominates these texts sonically are voices. Voices with a range of different pitches and inflections. Statistically and revealingly, the 5 most common word types in the Alice books are voice, with 86 instances, tone, cried, exclaimed, and shouted. Almost everything and everyone is endowed with human speech and is endowed with human speech in these books. This includes inanimate objects, so cards, chess pieces, foodstuffs, and living forms which are normally either silent, like flowers, or inaccessible or incomprehensible to human ears. Now, this generous bestowal of speech is informed both by literary conventions stretching back to Aesop and by scientific possibility. Interestingly, with one fleeting exception, Carroll makes no effort to align speech to species. There's no meowing or squawking or clucking. All the animals and objects sound just like humans. But they certainly don't all sound the same. Carroll stages an astonishing range of speakers, from the verbose pigeon to the tight-lipped caterpillar. The texture of these multiple voices and their modes of delivery are delineated by Carroll with huge care and attention to detail. He was a lifelong and highly committed theatre-goer, and he proves himself in these books to be a really skilled dramatist, I think, making use of a range of verbs, adjectives, adverbial tagging, and also metaphor and typographic emphasis. So there's all these kind of really script-like qualities within the Alice books, which show Carroll really being at pains to help us hear not just what the characters say, but how they say it. So we're better able to reproduce their speech, whether in our heads or out loud. So there are lots of largely unsatisfactory conversations, but there's also lots of non-verbal sounds in these books, which can in some cases be considerably more meaningful than words. The books are liberally peppered with uhs and ohs, with panting, sobbing, and shrieks. Then the sounds which issue unconsciously and involuntarily from mouths too, which are entirely outside the realm of signification. There are a fair few sneezes and snores, for example. Edging into the bestial and mechanical, these can also morph into music and song. And it's not just mouths that make noises. These books are full of noises made by bodies and body parts, often evoked through lively and inventive use of onomatopoeia. Given Carroll's aversion to all forms of coarseness, amply reflected in Tenniel's very decorous images, this might come as something of a surprise. And this is one example of how paying attention to sound can really help us to see the works afresh. So attendance to the sonic dimension of Carroll's work helps us to restore the fundamental physicality and mobility, which is at the very least downplayed by Tenniel's images. On the whole, the soundscape of the books tends very much towards the strident and the discordant. The music embedded within the text may be anodyne and easy on the ear, but this is offset and counterbalanced by the crashing of glasses, dishes, and oversized animate eggs, the squeaking of pencils, the rattling of pebbles, the blasting of trumpets. Framed and prompted by the pastoral and the sounds of the natural world, at the heart of these books is an often raucous modern core. Carroll draws extensively on the everyday, the mundane, and on contemporary industry, transport, and material culture. The notoriously noisy emblem of the Victorian age, the steam engine, is repeatedly invoked. It provides an analogy for the snorting of the pig baby, while the snores of the Red King sound to Alice like the puffing of a train, and the screams of the White Queen are likened to its whistle. Sheer din and boisterousness characterize some of the best known and most memorable scenes of these books. Alice doesn't just hear a crash, but a great crash, and the howling emitted by the baby is constant. But if Carroll can effectively turn up the volume, he can also turn it down, and he uses varying sound levels to comic effect. Wonderland's much remarked shifts in physical scale and dimension are then accompanied by variations in volume. Carroll sometimes simultaneously plays with size and volume together, as with the smaller talking flowers, who so take the larger Alice's breath away that they speak louder than she does. But alongside recognition of the rich, varied noisiness of the text, it's also really important to register their silences. As a broad brush indication, the words silent and silence are over 4 times more frequent than noise or noisy. Silence and sound are not positioned at opposite ends of the spectrum in these works, but instead shown to be closely bound to each other, taking place within dreams, so that technically everything that so vividly occurs within the frame narrative does so within Alice's vivid imagination. The books are a sustained reflection on the relationship between internal and external processes of perception, between mind and world. What Carol probes in particular is the complex intertwining of sounded speech and silent thought. At a time when the boundaries of sound were being pushed back and the possibilities of preserving and recording sound were developing apace, Carol reveals the sonic qualities of the seemingly silent processes of thinking, dreaming, and reading. Overall, then, Paul's question led me to understand that these are emphatically multimodal works. The Alice books are stunning visual creations, but they're also noisy books whose rich and varied soundscape runs the full gamut, from old, timeless, reassuring songs to the dissonant and often unsettling sounds of modernity. These findings fed into, and in fact are often directly drawn upon, in the video and PDF resources developed for the Alice Sound website, which I'm going to be talking about to you in a moment. Before I get to that, though, I'll just briefly outline what happened, in addition to the writing of this article that I've just been summarising, after those kitchen discussions, which were much quieter than the kitchen in Wonderland, at least most of the time. So after those discussions, Paul wrote the Wonderland Suite, which then premiered, including one performance with the London Symphony Orchestra's youth choir, at the Barbican back in November 2015. We then began working on Looking Glass in 2020, and the Looking Glass Suite had its first performance also in the Barbican in October 2022. So this is a shot from that performance, and this is the audience. And ahead of those performances, Paul and I delivered inset days for teachers to help them prepare their pupils to get involved in these performances. Both pieces, which are 20 and 28 minutes respectively, are distinct in their targeting of this particular audience, and in offering extensive opportunities to participate and get involved. Like the books themselves, the music Paul produced can work on different levels. It was designed to offer a great deal of flexibility in its performance. So it's built around simple, accessible foundations, so it can be sung by any 8-year-old voice. But that core can then also be upscaled for performance as conventional concert works by a professional orchestra and singers, in the way that you've already seen at the beginning of this talk. We weren't sure if something this long and based on a Victorian work would really work, something where almost all of the libretto was adapted from character dialogue. But the response and take-up to the first suite made it clear that it completely did. Children and young people were comfortable reeling off words like silvery, expressions like I do declare, dare say, provoking, contrariwise, and other intricacies and excellencies of Carolian language. Just in the interest of time, this was the inset day, and those are all teachers who came along to learn more about the music so that they could then pass that on to their own pupils. So just in the interest of time, I will just signal to you for a more detailed discussion of the adaptation process, sort of from the horse's mouth with Paul, as well as me talking, this video that we recently, which was the result of a recent presentation that we gave to the Lewis Carroll Society of North America, and the link is on there if you want to have a look at that. So the premieres and other performances that happened in other parts of the world, including Australia, were really great, obviously. And they reached thousands of children. So for each performance, there were about 2,000 children in the audience, and we've had about 6 or 8 of those. So it is no exaggeration to say that we've reached thousands of children already. But we knew that we could do more. For the second collaboration, we were able to secure funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And so we were in a position to ensure that not just the young people in the Barbican on those days of the performance would benefit from and have access to this new work, but anyone, anywhere in the world, and crucially, that this would happen at no cost at all. We also wanted to ensure that children, young people and teachers would get support and development, which the LSO provides to teachers of the schools that are attending the in-person performances. So in other words, simply put, what we did was we recorded both of the suites that Paul had written. These were performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, and then we developed a website called thealicesound.com, where these performances are housed alongside an extensive set of cross-curricular learning resources aimed at enhancing engagement with the music and with the books. So what I'm going to try to do now is show you the website so that you can see what I'm talking about. So hopefully this will work. Okay, so can you see the website? I think hopefully you can. I shall show you quickly around it now. Basically, so this is it. This is our homepage. What you have along the top here, I'll just show you, quickly scroll down. This is the homepage, giving you a sense of the various different components of the website. Along the top bar, you have the 2 different concert suites, Wonderland and Looking Glass, and their different movements. That's what you can see in the drop-down list. And then a tab for finding out more about the books and the characters. And then crucially, a tab here, which takes you through to a whole swathe of cross-curricular learning resources, spanning art, drama, writing, and music. So if you want to make a papier-mâché Humpty Dumpty, or have a Tweedle meltdown, and frankly, who doesn't, then this is for you. So just as the texts themselves span sound and vision and touch, the resources are also about music, but also drama, art, and writing. And they often combine several of these things at the same time. So for example, there's a resource on picturing sound. So I'm going to just hopefully now show you how the website works for one individual movement. So if we go to Looking Glass, you can, this might take a little bit of time to load up. You can here in this first big block, this is where you can access the entire performance. And then below that, you can get to each of the 9 movements. So what I'm going to do is just click on one of those. So we'll go through to Humpty Dumpty. And what you get here is a video of the movement being performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, then a series of films of Paul talking you through the music, what inspired him, some various different components to explain what's going on in the music. There's videos with me talking about the character and the books, and also a video with one of the singers, Emily, who basically gives a lesson in how to sing the songs. Then below that, you have a whole series of different resources which enable you to sing along or play along with the London Symphony Orchestra. That's why they're called kind of karaoke tracks. Then you have PDFs and PowerPoints of the lyrics and of the music. And finally, the various different creative resources which are particularly kind of linked to Humpty Dumpty. So that's the website. I can leave that on for a moment. Maybe I'll go back to the homepage before I stop sharing my screen. And no, actually, I need to go back. Sorry. So I would just say, in conclusion, I won't show you another film because you have access to all of them through the website. In conclusion, I would just say that clearly things are lost in adaptation processes, characters and scenes, but a lot is also gained. Gained for the composer, gained for the children involved, and also for me as a researcher. The whole thing has been hugely enlightening and enormously worthwhile in terms of my understanding of how the books work. I've also had a chance to witness firsthand which parts of them spark creative imaginations, and this kind of goes back to the question that was put in the end of the last session. It's also underlined to me really the importance of not underestimating children and young people, and of really investing in their musical and creative futures. In the UK, music education is being squeezed and squeezed. It's coming under more and more pressure, with kind of testing regimes becoming ever more dominant, and a sort of obsession with mathematics, for example. Ironically, Carol would probably have been quite pleased about that, but not about the other developments that are happening in the curriculum. So what we're hoping is that this will be a really helpful set of resources for children and teachers the world over. This is definitely not just for UK children. So do please share this resource very widely, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share it with you.